Welcome to the Monday, March 6, 2023 City of Lebanon Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. Kelly, will you start us off with a roll call, please?
Okay, Corey Coots.
Here.
Chad Kiger.
Here.
Bruce Polly, absent. Ron Edwards.
Here.
Roy Gross. Here.
Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from last month?
I make a motion, we approve the minutes as written.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Real quick, before we do that, can I vote?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
I abstain.
Corey's abstaining. Minutes are approved. We'll start off tonight with some old business that's been continued from the February 6, 2023 BZA meeting. Docket 23-7, Eli Lilly and Company, care of Michael O'Connor, requesting 4 development standard variances for a proposed industrial development to be located near 4002 North 150 West on approximately 602.42 acres. The property is zoned ID, General Industrial, and in the Interstate Overlay District. The variance requests are as follows. Maximum building height, UDO section 4.16.d. Overlay District building orientation, UDO section 6.2.f. Overlay District loading berth visibility from rights of way, UDO section 6.1.L.9. and mechanical equipment screening, UDO section 7.18.C.9.C. Ben?
Evening, board members. With your permission, I'm going to do this one a little bit differently because some of you haven't heard the overall story of the Eli Lilly site and their development. A couple of you have, but a couple of you have not. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to the requests and then turn it over to Lilly to give their presentation and walk through the overall development so you just understand what's happening on the site. And then we'll come back and I'll finish and walk through the 4 specific requests and the findings associated with each of those 4. So real quickly, just a brief overview here. We'll start off with the location of the site. This is a little over 600 acres, so we're talking about a very large site. This is in the north part of the community. Interstate 65 is to the west. 300 north is off the screen here to the south. This would be 150 west coming up to the center part of the site. 375 north runs along this southern part of the site, and then 450 north is the northern boundary of the site. And then you can see the railroad tracks or the eastern boundary here. So very large 600-acre site here, and they're going to be developing this as a campus, and they're going to walk through some of that details for you here in a second. This has gone through a number of different stages to get here. We've had the property zoned as part of the annexation. They did go to the council and have had the 150 West approved for vacation. This section here will be closed, and then they'll be improving roads around. So they'll be closing this road really so for security and for the overall campus that you see here. They're coming here tonight for a series of variance requests, and then they'll be at the Plan Commission for their development plan review and consideration in a couple weeks from tonight. So just a little bit of background on the variance requests. When this property was annexed as part of the phase 1 annexation for the LEAP district, the LEAP zoning district, which we established, had not been created yet. So for lack of having that zoning district created, we put it in the general industrial zoning district because that was the closest approximation of the uses we wanted within the overall LEAP district. So it does fall into our standard general industrial zoning classification with all the restrictions associated with that district. Based on the timing, it would have been most appropriate if we had the time to rezone this property to the LEAP zoning district, because it actually would have eliminated at least one of these variance requests for you here tonight, but it was more of a timing thing. That's about a 75-day process to get rezoned. And there just wasn't time in their process. They filed these back in December to fit in another 75-day process to rezone the property to the LEAP zoning district. So what we did is we looked at the general industrial zoning district requirements and what variances they would need based on those, but we were really asking them to design this site assuming that they were at least meeting the LEAP zoning district standards, if not exceeding them. So that was really the goal in designing this site, was to meet those standards regardless of the fact that it's zoned general ID, just understanding that we were going to have some variance requests associated. So the first one is specifically that, the maximum building height. The ID zoning district, which was designed for your traditional single-story industrial warehouse building with a maximum height of 50 feet, really wasn't contemplating these more complex industrial properties that would have multiple stories and much higher ceiling heights. They'll walk through here in a second. You'll see what these buildings look like. This is not a standard warehouse building. It's a much higher architectural standard you see here. But that is a standard that's specific to the general industrial zoning classification, because primarily it was contemplated these would be your standard warehouse or single-story industrial building that wouldn't really exceed 50 feet. If they would have rezoned to the LEAP zoning district, this height would have been allowed with an increased setback. And I'll show you here after they give their presentation that they do meet all the LEAP zoning district standards in addition to the general industrial standards, but just requesting the variance for the height. So this is one that actually would have been eliminated if they had the time to rezone the property up front, but just given the timing of it, we went this route, and I'll show you how they still meet those standards. The next two for building orientation and loading berths is actually due to the fact that this property is on the interstate and is in the interstate overlay district. So the way the interstate overlay district works is any property that's within 400 feet of the interstate is subject to the overlay district. And that includes if you have a larger property that extends outside of 400 feet, the entire property is subject to those standards. So if they, on this map, 400 feet, it kind of runs along the interstate in this manner, and the entire rest of this 600 acres, while not even within 400 feet, in some cases you can't really see to the other side of the property, it's all subject to those standards. And so if you're in the interstate overlay district and you're building a building close to the interstate, the two standards are that the building, the facade of the building that faces the interstate should look, either is the front facade or look like a front facade. In this case, again, we'll show you here, the actual building is over 1,200 feet away from the interstate, but it's still subject to those standards if it was within 400 feet. So that's, again, the nature of those, of both the building orientation and the loading berths. They have two loading docks that face to the west towards the interstate. But again, we're talking about a much larger distance where that building is actually located. So that's really the nature of those variances, is they're based on the fact that the entire 608 acres is subject to the overlay district standards, even though only the 400 feet adjacent to the interstate are actually in the overlay district. And then the final one is another one based on our interpretation that, again, they'll show you here in a little bit. They have a tank farm that kind of, it runs through the middle. It's the spine of the property. And we classified that as mechanical equipment because we really didn't have any better way to classify it for what it really is. And mechanical equipment has a screening requirement that there would be a wall at least 2 feet taller than the equipment that screens the entire thing from view. And really, our mechanical equipment requirements are based on people, like commercial HVAC equipment and things like that would only be, this tall. And in this case, you've got tanks that are 60 to 90 feet tall. So it's really not practical to put a 100-foot tall wall entirely screened. You'll see how big this area is to put a 100-foot tall wall entirely around this area. So we approach this to figure out how can we meet the intent of the screening requirements without actually having to put that big tall wall there. And they'll show you that here in a second. So there's just a quick overview of some of the background associated with these, and now I'd like to turn it over to the applicant to walk through the overall development for you, and then I'll come back and finish off with each of those 4 variances, the findings of fact and the recommendations. Oops, should put it back to the beginning.
So good evening. My name is Andy Metzel, and I'm an attorney with offices located at 1 Indiana Square, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46204. Had to think about that one for a second. It is my pleasure tonight to appear before you on behalf of Eli Lilly and Company. It is the first time that we really get to share some of the details about this development, and we're so excited to do that and finally have this opportunity. And in the context of the variances that are being requested, of course. I don't want to duplicate too many things that Mr. Bontrager went over, but I do want to share with you just some thoughts about Lilly and understanding perspective about at least their business operations. The company established in Indiana in 1876. It's really hard to believe how long-term this company has been a part of the state. And so you fast forward 150 years and you find yourself where we are today, and 100 medicines that they have discovered and innovated during that time frame. They're helping over 47 million people globally who rely on those medicines. And so in those years, since 1876, it has been one of their goals to always be innovative and always be looking forward to helping people live better lives. Part of that is to continue its manufacturing operations and innovation into research and innovation into finding more and additional medicines to improve those lives, and that's what they intend to do with these manufacturing facilities in Lebanon. So very excited about a $2.1 billion investment to be bringing that into this community, continuing to fulfill their goals. When this property was zoned to the General Industrial District, there was, and Mr. Bontrager alluded to this, no LEAP ordinance at the time, nothing really for us to have perspective. So all of the design initially that went into this process was looking at your current ordinance in the General Industrial District zone. I think that the Lilly folks have been very intentional about the design of this because it is a very large campus, 600 acres, in the way that they have been going through the development phases. This has not been something that they haven't talked about with planning. They have been engaged in this interactive project and receiving comments, actually making improvements to certain aspects of the site, and most particularly one of the buildings that faces the interstate and that I-65 interstate overlay district that we talked about. So it has been an interactive process. We have listened to comments that we've received. If public has reached out, answering questions, things like that. But I just wanted to let you know that it has been very helpful for planning to interact with us and give us their thoughts, particularly with regard to screening. And site changes have been made to be receptive to their concerns and that input. We are requesting 4 categories of development standards, and Mr. Bontrager went through those. The 2 of them that specifically relate to that interstate overlay district, we have the good fortune of having this very large 2 parcels of property for 2 separate integrated manufacturing facilities on this one campus, but it does then get impacted. It's in a very unique way by the overlay district that you normally would not see if you were just driving up and down the interstate here. You see sites that are developed immediately adjacent to the interstate. While we are technically developing immediately adjacent to the interstate, the first building is well over 1,000 feet before you even get to the side, the facade. So those are unique aspects. I want to talk with you about, those are the requested variances, and I think Ben's gone over those very well. Really, the legal criteria for approval of a development standards variance, and I share this with the board, I know you're well familiar with that, but also with the general public, just so that they understand too, the things that we are trying to demonstrate and to show the folks that we are making an effort to satisfy each and every one of those legal criteria. First and foremost, that what we are requesting will not injure the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. Second, that the use and value of the area adjacent to the campus will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. And third, that the strict application of the ordinance results in practical difficulties. Well, that is the legal standard, but I think it's important to understand this concept of practical difficulty. And practical difficulty in the law does not mean that it's impossible to be accomplished. It doesn't even mean hardship. But your ordinance in Lebanon is actually very instructive to us and to the public about what a practical difficulty really is. And I highlight from that ordinance that it's not a hardship, it's a situation where the owner could comply with the regulations but would like a variance to improve the site in a practical manner. And what you're going to hear is we have a number of folks in this front line here that are from Eli Lilly and Company. You're going to hear specifically from Jennifer Massey tonight, and she's going to talk about each of the buildings that are related to a variance and how that practical difficulty does apply to each of the variances that we are requesting. Specifically, she will talk about, I'll name a number of different issues, but they are mostly design and construction related, operations related, and efficiency related. They need to have high-tech manufacturing operations that actually will perform in the way that they are intended, and that means safely, and that means efficiently. So when we talk about the building height variance, it is not uncommon in most of the buildings that we see that are being constructed, even as warehouses, to exceed that 50-foot maximum that is allowed by general industrial. In fact, that's probably the impetus for the entire LEAP district, allowing a much greater height than Lilly is even seeking to accomplish. when you see the buildings that they are proposing, you're not going to see something that you would think of in your mind. If someone were to tell you to think of an industrial facility, what would you think of? What you're going to see tonight is some elevations and renderings of buildings that are much more like an office complex or an office building, glass, high-quality improvements, high-quality design, and those are their manufacturing facilities on this site, okay? The variances also align with the general intent of the ordinances. So what are the ordinances meant to provide? Are they meant to curtail development so that you don't have it? No, it's not. It's very apparent from the language that the ordinances are intended to encourage development and promote development that is responsible and that is high quality and that is innovative, and that is exactly what Lilly is trying to bring to this community. They also are intended to promote capital investment. So when you identify a site like this, you look at things like access to transportation. You look at a site where you can actually provide a very significant setback to protect adjacent property owners from being adversely affected. Mr. Bontrager alluded to this, but it is significant that Lilly started out with its development always building with its setbacks several hundred feet from the property line, not adjacent to the property line, several hundred feet back. And that was always the intention. And so as to not affect adjacent property owners, or at least minimize visual impact. What you're going to hear from Ms. Massey is also about additional berming and landscaping. So you have visual buffering from every single aspect of this property, be it from the north, south, east, or west, from the interstate or from a residence to the east. So you will have a buffer that you will see up to, that landscaping buffer, berming that is often higher than what is even contemplated by the ordinance. They're willing to build higher so that it provides additional berming, landscaping on top of that, and really create this very highly aesthetic, pleasing campus design instead of what you would typically think of as an industrial property. So I'll turn it over to Jennifer Massey because she's going to give you a lot of detail about the project, and please ask questions when you have them because that's what we're here for. Thank you.
Get myself set up. Good evening. Thank you for the time. Appreciate having us here to talk a little bit about our campus. I know some of you have heard an overview of our campus before, but I'll go through what we're doing here in Lebanon and then talk about the specific variances and some of the process-specific aspects of what we're doing that lead to these variances. So Andy mentioned Eli Lilly is a global pharmaceutical company, and we impact more than 47 million patients around the world. Recently, we've committed to investing in our manufacturing capacity, and that's to support an innovative pipeline to bring more medicines to patients. And that includes the investment here in Lebanon of more than $2.1 billion. The campus that you see on the slide in front of you is actually two manufacturing sites, so we have two separate sites within the campus. Both of the sites are advanced manufacturing, so they're going to have highly automated controls, high technology, and innovative design incorporated throughout. I'm going to try and use the cursor to point out a few things. So the larger of the two sites, which is here on the south central area of the campus, we refer to this site as LP1. So LP1 will be dedicated to API manufacturing. So API is active pharmaceutical ingredient. So that is the actual substance within the medicine that produces the therapeutic effect in the body. The second manufacturing site is here in the lower central part of the campus. We refer to this as LP2. So LP2 will be a cell and gene therapy site that's providing cutting-edge new therapies for patients. So overall, between the two manufacturing sites here on the 600-acre campus, we'll be producing medicines that go to patients that are facing things like diabetes and cancer and other serious illnesses. So the slide shows an overall view of the campus, and the layout, the relative size, the locations of the building, and the orientations are all correct here. I will say landscaping is not representative on this slide, and in some of the other slides it's also not fully represented. We are planning to meet all landscaping requirements, so we will be planting 6,300 trees and over 7,500 shrubs throughout the campus. Andy mentioned our intentional design here. The campus itself is laid out intentionally, and that's to keep the bulk of our buildings near the central and lower part, or central and southern part of the campus. And that's really to keep those setbacks, especially along the west, north, and east side, as large as they possibly could be. We've also designed the campus, even though it's two separate manufacturing sites, we've designed it to have a cohesive feel to it. So here near the employee entrance, we have a welcome center, and that's where any visitors or partners, vendors, and also regulatory agencies would enter the campus. They'll be welcomed there, and then they can proceed onto the two different sites from that location. Again, the orientation of the site and the orientation of the buildings supports that cohesive design. So I'll go into a little detail around the specific variances now. So on this slide, again, it's that same campus view, but we've added a little additional information related to the first two variances. So these are for, as Ben and Andy mentioned, they are for orientation of the LP2 facility, and then for the dock doors to be facing west on that side. As you can see highlighted here, the distance between LP2 and I-65 is significant, so it's greater than 1,200 feet. And actually on the next slide, you'll see a viewpoint pointing out LP2 from I-65. So again, the orientation here that's leading to those variants is to provide that cohesive campus feel. And then on this slide as well, you can see the landscaping that's in place. So at the top there is the external perimeter landscaping that will run along I-65 where we do not have our solar arrays. In the middle, you see the solar array buffer, so that's landscaping specific to where those solar panels are. And then that bottom colorful diagram here, again, that's not shown fully on the larger diagram, that's the landscaping specific to LP2 and around that building, the internal landscaping. So as I mentioned, this picture here shows that LP2 facility from a vantage point of I-65. The landscaping, both again internal and external, provides visual screening here, along again with that physical separation of greater than 1,200 feet. As stated previously, the orientation of the building there is for that campus feel. For the dock doors that are located on the west side of that building, we don't expect a lot of truck traffic going in and out of those dock doors, and not larger trucks. So semis would be a very irregular occurrence at those dock doors. The normal deliveries for those docks would be smaller delivery vehicles like box trucks. Additionally, we don't intend to have any additional mechanical equipment on the docks or around the docks.
Just real quick, is that two docks?
Yes, yes, that's correct. And actually, you can see that on here. That's correct, right? Two? Yep. Two doors. Just making sure. My engineering backup here. So on slide 5 here, you can see those dock doors a little bit, and Andy mentioned this, but we've taken into account the feedback as we've tried to understand the ordinance and make sure that we're meeting it. And in particular on LP2, we have updated our design to get closer to that front-like facade that's required. So you can see here on top is the previous design, which we originally planned on. And below that is the updated design. So there's a couple additions here. So there's windows that again give a front-like facade, and it's difficult to see, but there is a two-toned exterior finish as well added there. So we've taken that into account, and we've tried to move the design of that side of the building to again be much closer to the front-like facade. Okay. Going back to the overall campus view, I'd like to highlight the building heights. So this is the third variance. The tallest buildings on our campus are 125 feet tall, so that is greater than the 50-foot maximum. You can see those highlighted here in blue. So there are 3, this one up here, and then these 2 down here closer to County Road 375 North. The other buildings on the campus, the associated setbacks are also highlighted on the slide for your review. For the highest building heights, so those 125-foot buildings, the closest setback that we have is 300 feet, and that is on that southern side of the campus along County Road 375 North. The setback to the front of the building is 300 feet. That's greater than the UDO requirement. The actual distance to the highest part of that building is approximately 400 feet, so it's even greater. And then the setbacks throughout the rest of the site, as you can see here, are much greater even than that 300 feet. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you a rendering of the buildings themselves. So I'll show you what one of these buildings, these blue ones, these are our peptide manufacturing buildings. I'll show you what one of those looks like from the parking lot directly in front of it. And then I'm going to show you a vantage point actually from within the site. So if you can see, there is a plant road, an internal road, running along these buildings west to east. And the vantage point will be from approximately here. You'll be seeing this red central building and then the larger peptide buildings behind it. It's just to orient you a little bit before I move to those. So these are the two renderings that I just mentioned. So again, this is the largest height building that we have on campus. This is, again, from the parking lot directly in front of it. And then, like I said, like I mentioned, this is looking east across that kind of southern row of campus, seeing that red building on the previous slide, and then the 2 blue buildings behind it. On this rendering, 375 is actually off screen, so it would be towards the right of what you're looking at there. We wanted to show these really to demonstrate the finishes and what we're looking for from a design of our buildings. So as you can see, we're trying to make them warm, we're trying to make them inviting. These are manufacturing facilities located within that, but we want them to look, modern and aesthetically pleasing. We want them to be inviting for employees to work in. We want employees to be proud of where they work. So that's the intent of showing you what those look like versus a plainer exterior or a box design. Okay. So on this side, again, you can see these are the 2 blue buildings. This vantage point is from 375 North. Again, there's a significant distance there. There is berming, there is landscaping that obscures that view directly into those buildings. The berming here is higher than required, so we are planning a 10 to 14-foot berm along that south border. That's higher than the requirements. And then on the right-hand side of the slide is actually a picture of one of our facilities, a manufacturing suite inside one of our facilities. So the need for higher building heights is rooted in our manufacturing process requirements. So as I stated earlier, the buildings that we have here are advanced manufacturing. So they utilize advanced technology, advanced processes, and cleaning requirements. And you can see this is a real facility that we've actually just built and commissioned, very similar to those blue buildings that we're talking about. And you can see there's multiple areas within this suite. So up on top on the mezzanine, you'll see some equipment, and then below the mezzanine, you'll see a second area. So what's happening in the process here is material from that unit op that's up on the mezzanine is flowing directly below to the next area. That's a dry powder at this point in the process. So having that orientation helps prevent any type of transfer plugging that you would have with a dry powder. It also minimizes dust generation. Cleanability is improved as well because of the stacking of those. So this is one suite. Above that, you would have another suite where you would have additional unit operations and additional equipment where you could do mixing or material loading. And then below this, you would also have a utilities area that is supporting all the utilities to provide into the manufacturing process. So they're large rooms with high floor-to-ceiling requirements, and that is really in order to properly orient, properly operate, and maintain all of the equipment that's used to make medicine. Additionally, another point here is that the HVAC requirements in our facilities are quite high, so the air changes are higher than what you would see in like an administrative or an office setting, or even some of the warehouse settings. That means we have a lot of ductwork. Again, that adds into that floor-to-ceiling requirements. Okay, I'll move on to the last variance, and this is in reference to the mechanical screening. So again, this is our overall campus view, and you can see in this, the mechanical area and the utilities area runs along the center of the site here. Again, we've intentionally located that area to be behind those larger manufacturing facilities. And we've also highlighted here the significant berming that will be in place to make a direct line of sight difficult into those utility and mechanical areas. That berm is higher than what is required, again, on the south side, running across the perimeter of our south side of the campus. The mechanical areas are also a significant distance from the nearest public thoroughfare of 375 North, so they are approximately 900 feet from 375 North. And overall, between the majority of the viewpoints that you would have directly into one of the mechanical areas, what you would encounter would be the berming at the exterior of the site with landscaping, then internal landscaping, then our manufacturing buildings, and finally that utilities and mechanical area. So as we assess this and as we looked at our campus design, we did look for opportunities to provide strategic screening of this area. And one of the ones that we do believe there is a line of sight is right here in the corner. So that's along 375 North. And this is an area where the berm, there is no berm, so it's between berm, borders. And we have our truck entrance there. So again, you could have a direct line of sight from 375 North into this mechanical area. So we have agreed to add either additional landscape screening there. That is our proposal, to add additional landscape screening. We'll go through a landscape design process, and if for some reason that's not available, we'll do a physical screen at that location again to block that area. So this is the last slide that shows you another viewpoint, again, related to the mechanical screening. So from 65 is what you're seeing on the left-hand side. So again, seeing into that mechanical area is very difficult at the distance from I-65. On the right-hand side, you see in between these two buildings, that's where that utilities and mechanical area would be. But again, the berming there and the landscaping provides quite a bit of screening of those, even before you would get to a different type of screen. So one of the considerations we did have when we looked at options here and we assessed how we could possibly do this was the impact to operations. So if we screen individual pieces of equipment or even areas, there could be a negative impact to how we maintain and operate and see those areas. So our preventative maintenance policies require us to access them regularly, to go in and be around the equipment, so that screening could negatively impact those processes. That is all the information we prepared to share with you today. So I know Ben's going to talk a little bit more, but if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them, or anything you would like to discuss, but we do respectfully ask for approval and appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Just wanted to cap this off by walking through each one of those four variances and just, in fact, I probably won't even read all of the findings of fact. We've kind of talked about each of those three already, so I'll just highlight those for the record, and then also the recommendations. A couple other things that I just wanted to just quickly do. I know I mentioned that they more than meet the LEAP district standards, so I created a quick chart. I'll pull that up now. Oops. they want to bring the screen up. So just to walk through a little bit of a comparison here, and this is based on those peptide buildings, which are the 125-foot tall buildings that are closest to 375, that would have the most visual impact because they're 125 feet tall, and you saw some of those buildings were over 1,000 feet away, so they're about 300 feet away. So what I did is I compared, these are the general industrial zoning district requirements, which have a maximum building height of 50 feet. That's the reason for the variance request. The front setback requirement in general industrial is 100 feet. And the buffer requirement here, given the fact that the adjacent property to the south is also zoned general industrial and is planned for industrial development, the only buffer requirement that we'd see is because there's a street that exists there. If there were no street, there'd be no buffer requirement whatsoever. But because there's a street there, there is a non-residential street buffer requirement that would be 20 feet wide with 6 trees and 15 large shrubs every 100 feet. So this is what would be required if they were meeting the height standard in the general industrial district. So the second column shows you the proposed improvements. So again, you see that the request for the 125-foot tall building, their front setback that they're proposing is 300 feet, about 3 times the size of the required front setback. And then the proposed buffer there is a 10 to 14-foot tall mound with 8 trees and 15 large shrubs every 100 feet. So not only do they increase the planting requirements, they're also showing a significant mound along there that for a typical 6-foot tall person like me, if I was standing on 375 North, I wouldn't be able to see over the mound to see much of anything. So again, a significant screening requirement. And then comparing, as I mentioned, to the LEAP zoning district, and these are the LEAP zoning district standards, the maximum building height that you can do in the LEAP zoning district is 250 feet tall. And what happens then is what's allowed is up to 75 feet tall, and then for every foot taller than 75 feet, you add 5 feet to your setback. So in this case, for a 125-foot tall building, the front setback requirement would be 300 feet. So they meet the front setback requirement of the LEAP if it were in the LEAP zoning district. And again, in the LEAP zoning district, industrial to industrial property does not require a buffer yard because they're similar uses. So again, we go back to the non-residential street buffer as being the only buffer required if this were in the LEAP zoning district. And that would be back to the 20-foot width with 6 trees and 15 large shrubs every 100 feet. So they're actually well exceeding the LEAP zoning district requirements with what they're proposing here. So just wanted to kind of walk through that for you and kind of show some of the justification and some of the background as to the building height variance requests. And so again, as we mentioned, I'll just indicate that the findings of fact are provided in the staff report for the record. And then on the request for, let me find my spot in my notes here. On the request for the additional building height, we have recommended approval of that variance request. In terms of building and orientation and loading bursts, we've talked about that already, and you've seen some of their distances there, that building is approximately 1,200 feet away from the interstate, about 3 times the width of the interstate overlay district area. And with the screening, in fact, I was going to bring up, and the scale, again, you saw it already in the scale of this, you can't even hardly tell how many trees and shrubs it are, but in addition to the perimeter landscaping that will be provided along the interstate, which is substantial, you can also see, this doesn't look like much that you see here, but I guarantee you that's probably hundreds of trees and several hundreds of shrubs that would be planted within this area between the interstate and the property. So there's going to be substantial screening for that loading dock area. And in addition, as they had already indicated, they have provided some upgrades to that elevation to give it a more front-like facade. So while it doesn't necessarily meet the exact letter of the building orientation requirement, they have provided intent to provide more of a front-like facade, which is part of our discussions with them to be able to raise the level of that elevation for what might be visible from the interstate. And so in terms of both of those, again, the findings of fact are located in the staff report for the record, and we have recommended approval of both the loading berth and building orientation requirements. And finally, on the mechanical screening, again, they provide a lot of information for you there on the substantial buffer that will be provided. And then in discussions with staff, they have provided some additional screening that they will provide at that southeast corner. That's about one of the few areas where you might get, if you're traveling westbound on 375, you come over the railroad tracks, you might catch a glimpse of that area as you're passing the fire station in that area. So what they had agreed to is they would provide some additional screening in that area, whether that would be additional landscaping if that was appropriate, or if that's not substantial enough, then they would provide a physical screen in that area, because that's an area where they could do that. So while I may actually amend my recommendation because I don't have it on there, but we have recommended approval of that variance for the mechanical equipment screening. I might suggest it was subject to a final determination of the screening that would be provided in the southeast corner of that area, and they'll work with staff to determine that. And with that, if you have any questions for me or for the applicant, we'd be happy to answer any additional question you might have. And I will just mention for those in the audience, this is not, we're not evaluating the overall development. That'll happen here in a couple weeks at the Plan Commission. We're looking at these 4 specific items related to these variances. So we're really just focused on those. And then in the Plan Commission in a couple weeks, it'll be more of the overall development and the standards associated with that.
Board have any questions for Ben or the applicant?
What was your addition to the screening?
I would just say that just conditioned upon the applicant working with staff to determine a final landscaping element for that southeast corner of the mechanical area.
Okay, this is a public hearing. So at this time, I'd like to invite the public to make comment if they choose. If you do, please make sure that you sign in. When you do speak, state your name, address, and please limit yourself to 3 minutes. Public comment? Okay, none at this time. I would accept a motion. Close it. Thank you. The public hearing part is closed. And at this time, I would accept a motion from the board.
Want to take them individually, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's up to the board. If you want to do them all together and then just add that condition on the final one, you could do that, unless there's some concern about taking them all together. If the board is acceptable to do them all together, that's
I think we
perfectly
can
fine.
Combine them, yeah.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the requested variances for building height, building orientation, loading berths, mechanical equipment screening, contingent on working with the staff on a final landscaping of the southeast corner.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Kelly?
Corey Coots,
Yes.
Chad Kiger,
Aye.
Ron Edwards,
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you very much. I think we're going to take a short, do we need to do that, Ben?
Yeah, if there's anybody that was here specific for Lily, you certainly could stick around for the rest of our agenda items, or if the applicants choose to do so, but we can just take a quick recess to let anybody who's here just for this application to go ahead and head out, and then we'll restart the meeting.
Recess for a few minutes. Thank you.
sure.
Nah.
Okay, we're back on the record. And that concludes our old business for the evening. We'll move into the new business side of the agenda here. The first new business is docket 23-15, Mighty Little Hands Academy requesting a use variance to operate a daycare and pre-K ministry to be located at 1001 Ransdale Road. The property is zoned ID Industrial District. Matt?
Good evening, Board. Sorry if you see my goosebumps, it's like we're selling frozen bananas in here or something, it's freezing, so. Next item on the agenda is, Mr. Kiker mentioned, Mighty Little Hands Academy. Some of you that have been on the BZA since October might remember this. They did come before you for a variance of use application, exactly identical to this for a property just north of what we're going to discuss tonight. So back in October, it was at 701 Ransdale Road. The request tonight is for a property at 1001 Ransdale Road. So we pull up the screen, I'll just kind of orient you to where we're at. Ransdale Road is the kind of the S-curve here, Interstate 65 along the western southern portion, the CXS rail line on the east side, and you can kind of see this is the bridge where Ransdale Road turns into Noble Street. So the yellow property is 1001 Ransdale. The applicant, Mighty Little Hands Academy, has identified a need for childcare for their staff. And not just for their staff, but also a community need. So back in October, they came before you with a plan to remodel a recently purchased building into a daycare. Since then, they've, in their determinations and studies, they've identified that they could have increased capacity for more children if they were to remodel their office area at 1001 Ransdale. So before you tonight is the same request that was before you in October, just at a different parcel. Both of them were zoned general industrial, which daycare facilities are prohibited use, thus necessitating the need for a variance of use request before you tonight. So I'll kind of walk through the findings of fact for you here briefly and kind of remind you of what all those are. The first of the criteria is the variance of use to permit a child care center would not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, or general welfare of the community. The proposed daycare center will meet all applicable building codes for said use and will be entirely contained within the building and/or within a constructed fenced-in outdoor recreation area that is planned to be built behind the building, between the building and the railroad tracks. The second criteria is the use variance would not affect the use or value of the area adjacent to this property in a substantially adverse manner. The applicant's proposing to make improvements to both the site and to the building. The building will receive some cosmetic improvements, including a playground area added to the back. And while the adjacent properties are also zoned general industrial, the area has a variety of mixed uses already. Some of those other uses, the Caring Center is out in this area. There's a church, an appliance repair store, the Lebanon Community Schools bus garage, former mental health facility. So the proposed use would not inhibit the ability of any of the neighboring properties to continue to use their properties as they currently are now. The third criteria, the need for the variance arises from some condition peculiar to the property. The property is zoned industrial for industrial uses. However, again, the surrounding neighborhood contains a mix of industrial, office, and commercial uses. So the applicant's request to use a portion of their property for a daycare would not be, or would be compatible. The strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance would constitute an unnecessary hardship if applied to the property. The applicant's proposing to use the office portion of their industrial facility for the proposed daycare use. The use is intended to serve their employees' childcare needs as well as the overall needs of the community, as I mentioned before. Given the desire to directly serve their employees at the facility, the childcare facility will be directly connected to the employees being served and will be ancillary to the primary use of the facility, which is industrial. And then lastly, the approval does not interfere substantially with the City of Lebanon Comprehensive Plan. The plan designates this area for industrial uses. While the proposed use of the applicant is not permitted in an industrial use, it does not interfere substantially with Lebanon's overall comprehensive plan. So with that, planning staff does recommend approval of the variance of use application to permit a daycare facility within the general industrial zoning district, subject to the following condition. That the approval of the variance of use is limited to those daycare uses proposed by the applicant. Any change in use or increase in the intensity of the use by the current or any subsequent owners will require approval by the City of Lebanon Board of Zoning Appeals. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. The applicant is here tonight as well.
Any questions for Matt?
Just one, in terms of parking, was parking contemplated?
Yes.
Given the
Yeah.
daycare usage?
Yes, and the parking does meet the terms of the standards in the development ordinance.
For ID or for a traditional daycare use?
For the daycare.
Okay, perfect.
We have adequate fencing?
I'm sorry?
Adequate fencing?
They do intend, my understanding, I'll let the applicant maybe expand on what the outdoor recreation area will be like, but it is our understanding there will be a fenced-in playground area behind the building.
No fencing in front?
Not to our knowledge, no.
Okay.
UDO does not permit fencing within the front.
Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome.
The applicant like to say a few words?
Hi, I'm John Nyrider. I'm the president of the board of this daycare and also the president of the company that represents where the daycare is actually going to be housed. As opposed to the fencing, we're planning on keeping it off of the railroad setback behind the building. There's kind of a triangle-shaped enclosure is what it's going to look like, but there's adequate space there for equipment and children to play back behind the building, and you wouldn't be able to see it from the road or the interstate or anything like that. That's.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, this is a public hearing. I'd like to open it up for any public comment. Again, please sign the sheet, state your name and address, and limit yourself to 3 minutes. Okay, the public hearing portion of the meeting of this item is closed, and I would accept the motion on docket 23-15.
I just have one question on the subject at the end. When you say doesn't intensify, are we talking square footage, number of kids? Do we need to specify? That's kind of.
It could be any or all of those things. If they've got 120 kid capacity now, in order to go to 180 kids, they would probably need to increase the space. So if they were looking to significantly add square footage or add to the number of kids, it's something we want to make sure that we have the ability to review that before they would just do that, so.
Do we have an anticipated number now?
I think they do have an anticipated capacity. I don't know what that number is off the top of my head, but I was thinking it was around 120, wasn't it? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we just want to make sure if ownership changes or if anything about the operation
Right,
changes.
I was just curious if that was a little vague, because, if you add 20 more employees that all have kids, that's technically an intensified,
Yeah.
but to me, you're still serving the same purpose, so I don't know that that really covers the intent, so I don't know.
It's subject to staff interpretation. If it's a notable, if they're going to go from 120 to 130 kids, we're probably not going to make them come back to the Board of Zoning Appeals. But if they're wanting a significant expansion,
Okay.
adding on to the building or taking over a much larger portion of the building, we would just want to make sure there's no other impacts like to parking, like you asked about before, things like that. So just
Okay.
make sure that we have the ability, as a lot of it's when ownership changes. We just want to
Right.
make sure if ownership changes,
So
that
we-
everybody understands the requirements.
Both sides, we feel okay with that wording? Yeah. You guys are good, okay.
And that's a standard requirement we essentially put on every use variance, just to give us a trigger to say, hey, you got to come back and talk to
Right.
planning staff to make sure this is still okay.
Right.
What are your current limits now from a space standpoint? In terms of how many children?
120.
No, you're expecting 120, but is that your max limit?
Sure. It's not. We could technically go up from there. I brought Don with me, who's familiar in the operational standpoint, but basically it's a we have the space in this area, but it's staff to child. You know, we have to follow state standards, so we would have to bring on more staff to increase more children in the rooms. And the 120 also includes our base program. So we would have before and after school care in an area. The actual classroom and, you know, kids that are there full time, it would be much smaller number than that.
Right. Cool.
Thanks.
Very cool. Thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve docket 23-15 and that the approval of the variance of use is limited to those daycare uses proposed by the applicant. Any changes in use or increase in the intensity of the use of the current or any subsequent owners will require approval by the City of Lebanon Board of Zoning Appeals.
Second.
Motion and a second. Kelly?
Corey Coots,
Yes.
Chad Kiger,
Aye.
Ron Edwards,
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0. Thank you.
Yeah, very cool. I liked it back in October. It's even better now, so thank you, guys.
Okay, next up, docket 23-16, Lebanon Community School Corporation requesting development standard variances for an expansion of Harney Elementary School located at 1500 Garfield Street. The property is zoned IN or institutional. The development standard variances requested are as follows. Number 1, parking lot interior landscaping, UDO section 7.8.J.2. Parking lot perimeter landscaping, UDO section 7.8.J.3. And parking area curb, UDO section 7.5.C.3. Matt?
Good evening again. I think tonight we're all somewhat familiar with Harney Elementary School, located off of Garfield Street and Camp Street, kind of right in the center of town, just west of State Road 39. The applicant, Cash and Wagner, on behalf of the Lebanon Community School Corporation, has the intent to add additions to the existing elementary school to help increase capacity within the school. And I'll kind of walk through some of these additions, and then we'll talk about those variances as we're identifying these changes. So in the dark gray here, we can see two different expansions that they're proposing. One on the east side of the building to add additional administrative office space to the front. And then on the rear side, on the west side of the building, where current playground sits, they will be adding a new gymnasium to the building. Then there'll be, my understanding, the applicant will be converting the existing gymnasium into additional classrooms. So as part of that, because you're taking away some playground space, they will be adding a new playground area. On the southeast corner, you can see here as I'm circling, will be a new bus parking area. And then the existing bus lane that runs along Garfield Drive right now will be extended into a parent pickup and drop-off lane, which will run the entire length of the southern property. We'll cut the corner here, head up the west side of the property, and scroll up a little bit. We'll enter into the parking lot, loop around, pick up here on the west side of the building, and then exit out the north side of the property. So the school is planning some significant upgrades, not only to the building, but to the processes associated with parent pickup and drop-off to help speed things up and also increase that capacity or what will be intended or expected future growth within this school. So the variances that are requested that Mr. Kiker went through mostly deal around here with the bus parking area. The first is our UDO requires that all parking and drive areas for non-residential uses be completely curbed. The applicant is requesting relief from curbing in the bus area for a couple of reasons. One of the primary reasons is that this area is intended to sheet drain down here to this detention facility. Should we require curbing, or should curbing be placed around this parking area, they would be required to put underground detention system for this specific parking lot, which would change the entire drainage on this particular site. So they're asking relief for the curbing. You can see they do still have curbing out near the drive cut, which will be along Garfield Street, but back at the parking area, they intend to not have the curbing and allow the drainage, the sheet drain to the neighboring detention that's on site. The removal of the curbing will not have any impact on drainage of nearby properties. Everything is still designed to drain onto their property and then properly drain into the existing storm sewer system that the city has set up there. The second variance request is parking lot interior landscaping. And this kind of is pretty common when we talk about large vehicles such as semi-tractor trailers or buses in this particular case. But interior parking landscaping and large vehicles don't really blend well together. They tend to either damage the landscaping or damage the vehicles or both. So the applicant's requesting relief from those interior landscaping requirements. Let me get to my notes here. The request to eliminate the landscape in the bus drop-off will allow for safe maneuvering of those buses into and out of the lot, and will have no material impact on the surrounding properties in the area. And then the third variance requested is parking lot perimeter landscaping. This is something, I don't want to say it's unique, but the perimeter landscaping requirement would have required trees and shrubs to be planted around the entirety of the new parking area. The applicant is still proposing to plant all the necessary materials that are required per our UDO standards. They're just going to be planting them in some alternate locations. What you see here, you can kind of see around the southern portion of the bus lane is a continuous row of shrubbery. And they are actually planting the trees that would be required along the parking area. They're planting those along the western portion of the property. One of the biggest reasons for this, moving the plant material around, is to ensure the safety where students will be being picked up and dropped off. So having a line of sight and being able to see over those shrubs and not having trees block that visually just makes it a safer environment. So again, I'll reiterate, they are intending to plant all the necessary and required materials on the site. Just some of those materials will be planted in an alternate location than specifically right around the bus parking area. So for the record, I will indicate that all the findings of fact for the statutory criteria are outlined within the staff report. I've touched on a few of those topics as well during our discussion. But in review of the application, the City of Lebanon planning staff does recommend approval of the development standard variance request for the three. One, to permit relief from the parking area curbing, also to permit relief from the parking lot interior landscaping requirement, and then finally to permit relief from the parking lot perimeter landscaping requirement. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have, and the applicant's also here tonight, can discuss anything further with you as well.
Any questions for Matt? Nope. Branson?
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Ken Franzen, and it's my privilege to be the attorney for the Lebanon Schools. And I'm here just to introduce a few people who are here who can answer your questions if you do have any. First of all, Dr. John Milliman, the superintendent, is here to talk about the reason for the expansion of Harney and the plans that have been developed over a several-month process. We also have Nathan Wagner, who's with the firm of Cash Wagner. They're the surveyors and the civil engineers on this project. And also Dale Wagner, no relation, is an architect with Gibraltar Design, and they're the architectural firm involved in this project. There are actually two other matters that you'll get to in a minute. One involves similar expansion and improvement, renovation of the Perry Worth Elementary School. So they'll go through the same sort of analysis that Matt just outlined. And we also need a conditional use approval for the Perry Worth Elementary School. For those of you who've been on the board a while, several years ago, the Indiana United Methodist Children's Home on Camp Street needed approval for expansion, construction of some new living units on the property. And we came to find that the the complex, the children's home, has actually been there before the zoning ordinance was enacted, and the property had never been properly zoned under the current ordinance for what they're using. And so the city said, actually, Perry Worth predates our zoning ordinance. The land is not zoned for schools currently, because at the time it was built out there, it was zoned ag, and there was no problem putting the school there. Since then, the site has actually been annexed into the city of Lebanon, has been assigned single-family zoning, as I remember. So they need to get a conditional use to allow a school in the current zoning district. It doesn't change the use. We're just expanding an existing school. Nothing will materially change other than the school will be bigger and better, and the parking and traffic and that sort of thing are going to be improved with these improvements. But that's why we have to get a conditional use for that project itself. So Mr. Wagner can talk, Mr. Wagner or Mr. Wagner can talk, and Dr. Milliman can talk if it's needed. But if you don't have any questions, it's been well presented, at least the first part here for Harney, by Matt Reynolds. Thank you.
Questions for the school? Okay.
Just a quick clarification, so this first docket is specifically to the variances requested for Harney Elementary. The next one, then we'll get a chance to see the details on the Perry Worth Elementary improvements and those variants requested.
This being a public hearing, would like to invite the public to comment. Okay, not seeing anyone jumping up, we'll close the public hearing portion of the meeting, or of this docket. And I'll look for a motion for Harney Elementary.
I'll make a motion for docket 2316, a motion to permit relief from parking curbs, parking lot interior and perimeter landscaping.
Second.
Motion and a second. Kelly?
Corey Coots,
Yes.
Chad Kiger,
Aye.
Ron Edwards,
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 4-0. Thank you. As Mr. Franson alluded to, Lebanon Community School Corporation is here for three separate variances that we have listed under three separate dockets. The second one being docket 23-17. Lebanon Community School Corporation requesting development standard variances for an expansion of Perry Worth Elementary School located at 3900 East 300 South. Property is zoned SF, Single Family Residential, and the development standard variances requested are: number one, parking lot interior landscaping, UDO section 7.8.J.2, parking lot perimeter landscaping, UDO section 7.8.J.3, parking area curb, UDO section 7.5.C.3, and front building setback, UDO section 4.4.D. Matt, or, I'm sorry, Ben.
It's me. I tried to get Matt to do all these. He wouldn't take them all for me. So thank you again. If they want to pull up the screen, we'll talk a little bit about the additions that are taking place at Perry Worth Elementary School. A little bit more extensive than Harney. As you can see here again, similar to what Matt talked about, you can see in the dark gray areas, you see the expansions to the building, classroom spaces, and also additions to the cafeteria area here. And then in terms of pavement, there's a couple of three additions here. Again, you see a similar bus drop-off area to the southwest of the building here. And then there is a parking area that's being added along this east side of the building for cafeteria service staff that would park here adjacent to the cafeteria. And then you're seeing some additional parking area improvements to the north of the building, including another parent drop-off lane that would bring people in the north side of the site and down past the building and back out here. And actually, in this case, there are several additional drive cuts that they're actually cleaning up a little bit to make the site work a little bit better. There was another drive cut up in this area here on the north, and we just, as we're working with them, trying to get parents into this area and out to this area, they want to make sure there weren't people trying to cut back to additional, as you know, the quickest way out, that's the way they're going to go. So we want to try to clean that up a little bit, make sure that they're entering one way and exiting one way. Similar area down here, getting everything just in one direction and out one direction. So a little bit of cleanup on some of the drive cuts that were down here. And so those are the extent of the additions. And then we've got one additional variance associated with this one. So the three of them are exactly the same request as we had on Harney. First one associated with parking area curb. You got two areas. One would be the bus drop-off area, and then the second would be this larger parking area to the north of the building. As you can see, the detention is located directly south and adjacent to the bus parking area, and so their intention is to sheet drain that parking lot into that detention area and then take it off the site from there. And similar to Harney, this whole entire site all sheet drains now, so really trying to maximize the site and the continuation of the site, really looking to try to provide drainage in the same way as the existing site does. That's really what we're trying to do here with these new additions. So given the fact that the existing site all sheet drains into swales and into detention areas, the new elements will too. So you can kind of see the area where that will be provided. And then this parking area to the north that's intended to sheet drain everything to the north into a dry detention area that can also be a playing field that you see here to the north. So that would be the request for relief from the parking area curb requirement, would be related to those two elements you see there. Interior and perimeter landscaping, you can see here on this parking area to the north, they have provided the required interior parking lot landscaping, so where they're requesting relief from that interior landscape requirements associated with the bus parking area for similar reasons that Matt discussed the last time. Safe maneuvering of buses in and out of the site. Those larger vehicles just don't work very well with parking lot islands. So they have requested relief from that requirement to allow the bus parking area to be constructed without those interior parking lot islands. Similar again on the perimeter landscaping, again, as Matt had suggested, they have provided all the plants. They've just moved locations to improve safety in areas where they know there's going to be significant children. So you can see in the bus parking area, they have provided some of those shrub plantings along this perimeter that you see here where they can, and obviously when you get into an area where there's going to be drainage, it's a little bit harder to provide some of the plants there, so they focus the shrub planting areas on this southeast corner of this parking area. And then you see a lot of the tree plantings are provided along this parking area to the north and along the street. So where there would be trees here, they have moved them to other locations up here around drives and along the north side of this parking area. So again, similar to Harney, they have provided all the plants that are required. They just have moved them around just to provide a little bit more safe areas where they know that there's going to be regularly students that are coming and going. The final one, this is actually something that we discovered as we were going through a review of the site, and that would be related to this building addition that you see here that's associated with the cafeteria. The first set of plans I submitted had shown the setback for that building meeting the setback requirements of the UDO, and then we had discovered that's because there's no right-of-way that's been dedicated along 400 East out there. Which is something that we need to make sure we have right away, because at some point in the future, 400 East is going to have to be expanded. As a result of us requesting a proposed right-of-way of 50 feet along that road, we had reduced their setback to something less than 50 feet from the new right-of-way line. So we actually created the need for the variance by requesting the proposed right-of-way on 400 East. So as opposed to them having, I believe it was, let me find my notes on that one. Should have got them out before I started talking. So, excuse me, it's actually a 60-foot front setback requirement because in the SF zoning district, there's a 60-foot requirement along an arterial roadway. So they would have met the 60-foot requirement if measured from the center line of the road, because they own to the center line of the road right now. By requesting them to dedicate a 50-foot half right-of-way along their frontage, we're reducing their setback to about 40 feet from the new right-of-way line. So they would still be a significant distance, almost 90 feet from the center line of the road, so the building is still significantly set back. It's just that 50 feet of that is going to become proposed right-of-way for the road. We do know at some point in the future we are going to need to expand that road with school traffic and everything that's going to be happening in Waterford over the next 10 years. There's going to be increased traffic in that area, so it is very important to make sure we get the right-of-way dedication so we have the space to do that. So we've actually created the need for the variance request by requiring them to dedicate right-of-way. So that's a little bit of background there, and they can talk a little bit about how this building works and what they need this for. They did look to see whether there's a way that they could redesign this so that they could meet the setback, and really just for the efficient use of this building and the cafeteria space here, it made much more sense for them to request the variance and try to figure out how to make that work the way it needs to work with the cafeteria there. They did have to, there was parking along that east side of the building that was in also the parking setback, so they were able to relocate that parking to make sure it met the setback for parking. So they did improve this area to make sure the parking met the setbacks, the building, it was just going to be a real challenge to make that work and also meet that additional 20 feet that they would need to meet that setback. So that is the justification for the variance there, as it actually arises from a need the city had for that dedicated right-of-way. So with that, again, I will indicate that the findings of fact are contained in the staff report for the record. And with that, then, staff has recommended approval of the 4 variances as have been presented to you. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Ben?
If it were zoned properly in the first place, would we meet the setbacks?
I believe
Isn't
in
it
institutional,
shorter
it would have been
on-
a 50-foot setback, so there still would have been a little bit of an
Little bit
issue,
over.
but it would have been a little bit closer.
Just curious.
Yeah.
Dr. Millman, not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot, would you be willing to tell us a bit about the expansion and the need and?
Sure. You're talking about like what's going to be added, what's part of those
Yeah,
big
just
gray
in general.
boxes
Yes.
there? We'll be adding kindergarten classroom spaces, 2 preschool classrooms, and generally, is general classroom space. The cafeteria is relocating the kitchen, turning the kitchen into expanded student seating. It's a very undersized kitchen currently, even for the students that we have there now. So that will be turned into a student seating area, and then there'll be a new modern kitchen to be able to serve the students there. That's the main thing. Of course, we're very happy to be able to separate bus traffic from car traffic on both of these campuses to enhance our safety. Perry Worth will also have an expanded and kind of remodeled main office area, relocating our student resource officer, police officer to the front of the building to enhance the safety there as well. Redoing the front facade of both Harney and Perry Worth. So we're excited about upgrading the outside aesthetics as well as the interior spaces.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're not changing the mascot again, are you?
Pardon me?
You're not changing the mascot
No, sir.
again, are you?
No, sir.
It's changed like 4 times since I
I
left.
know, right?
I started as a Viking, just so
There
you
you go.
know.
We've got a lot of things on our plate. That's not one of them.
Okay.
Again, this is a public hearing. I would like to open it up to the public for comment. Okay, we'll close the public portion of this docket and look for a motion.
Make a motion to approve docket 23-17 as written.
Second.
Kelly?
Corey Kuntz,
Yes.
Chad Kiger,
Aye.
Ron Edwards,
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. And finally, docket 23-18, Lebanon Community School Corporation requesting conditional use approval for an elementary school to be located at the SF Single Family Residential Zoning Classification.
Thank you, Mr. Kiker. Kent alluded to this a little bit earlier. This is a little bit of an administrative cleanup here. The Perry Worth Elementary School was actually constructed in the county's jurisdiction. It was not, that site was not in the city limits when that school was constructed. When the city annexed that property, everything was put into the default SF zoning classification, everything in the annexed area. And the SF zoning district requires conditional use approval for a K-12 school use. So for this entire time, it was a legally existing non-conforming use because it didn't have the required conditional use approval. Now we're looking at extensive improvements to that legal existing non-conforming use, so just to clean everything up and go ahead and get the approvals in place that we need for the future, we felt it was appropriate to go ahead and get that conditional use approval on the books as required in the SF zoning district for a K-12 school, so that we can get that cleaned up, and in the future, as they're doing additional work and expansion on the site, they've got all those approvals in place, and they're good to go from this point forward. So again, this was something where the school was constructed before it was in the city zoning jurisdiction, and as it was brought in under a default classification, as opposed to institutional zoning district, which would have been more appropriate at that time. So we essentially created the non-conforming use by annexing the territory, and so we're just cleaning it up now while they're doing these additional projects. So with that then, the City 11 Planning staff recommends approval of the conditional use to allow a school in the SF zoning district. Happy to answer any questions if there are any.
It doesn't have anything Say, and
Hey, at least this one's not on top of roads like the old Stokes. Call that a win.
okay, any public comment? Then open up public comment. Okay, we'll close the public portion, and I'll look for motion.
I'll make a motion to approve docket 23-18 as written.
Second.
Motion and a second. Kelly?
Corey Coons,
Yes.
Chad Kiger,
Aye.
Ron Edwards,
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
All right, motion passes 4-0. Thank you very much. That concludes our agenda and new business for the evening. The next regular Board of Zoning Appeals meeting is scheduled for Monday, April 3rd, 2023 at 7 PM. And I would look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.